Walter Cronkite once said, America's healthcare system is neither healthy, caring, nor a system. Keep this in mind as we discuss today the challenges of the American healthcare and how that might impact your financial well-being. My name is Dr. David Oualaalou.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
Today, David and I are taking a deep dive into the American healthcare system. For some people, it is outrageously successful and good for them. For 28 million people, it doesn't even exist. There's no healthcare system and no insurance available for them. For the people in the middle, it has varying degrees of success. With over 70% of Americans saying that there's a real problem or there's a crisis in the American healthcare system, we're going to take a good look at what's really going on here.
Well, that's correct, Ross. You're absolutely correct about those stats. 70% of Americans are saying that the American healthcare system is in a major crisis. In other words, it needs a top-to-bottom review for it to be fixed. Well, we've been hearing this story before, and nothing has changed.
Well, some things have actually changed. For example, the cost of insurance is skyrocketing.
For sure.
The cost per American has gone up several $1,000s. The percentage of gross domestic product has gone up sharply. In 1960, it was 5%, and it's projected in next year or the year after, it's going to be 19.4%. This is a shockingly large number.
That's correct. Well, according to the Tax Policy Center, they did have some numbers as far as describing how many are covered and how many are not. For example, 56% of Americans are covered through their employer. You got about, there are some stats here that about 8% through a private market, 22% covered by Medicare, 4% by private services,
and the rest have no coverage
at all. No
at
insurance at all.
And that number is like 28 million Americans have no insurance coverage whatsoever.
Well, that leads to the fundamental question. Now, there are those who say there is nothing wrong with the American healthcare system. And for one, I will say, yes, there is nothing with it because the American healthcare system is for profit. So if you are thinking about it from a profit perspective, there is nothing wrong with the American system.
And you take a look at how come the costs are so high. Well, we have the health insurance companies themselves, which have very expensive overhead. They have layer after layer of bureaucracy. They have they have investors that require payment for investing in these things. And they have high-priced executives. And you compare it with some place like Germany, where these systems are not for profit. And the costs are all regulated by negotiation with the non-profit insurance companies. And prices are all regulated and much, much lower.
Well, you're absolutely correct, Ross, and I will share this with our viewers. I have family members who live in Stuttgart, in Germany, and during some conversations sometimes we will have over the healthcare system, they are informing me that, for example, a procedure in Germany that will cost, as an example, $1,000, the same procedure here in the United States will cost about $50,000. And they wonder, why is it so expensive? And I told them same thing. Why is it cost only $1,000? The answer is the government set the prices across the board, so no private entity will charge whatever it wants. And something we don't have in the United States.
And now another example of that is, I saw a person interviewed in Germany about, well, what do you think an ambulance cost would be in the United States? They said, you mean you pay for that? They said, yes, we do. What would you guess? They said, well, how about $50? I was recently dealing with someone who had to have a 15-minute ambulance ride, and it was $1,795.
Wow.
Talk about outrageous. And then we start looking at the quality of care. And and Germany has this really interesting system of everyone is covered. The cost is so much lower per person. Something like $5,000 versus $8,000 for Americans. And all their statistics on the quality of life are better. Germans live 2.5 years longer. Infant mortality is about half in Germany what it is in the United States. Maternal mortality is 1/4 that of Americans.
Wow.
Yeah, so you really see, this makes a huge difference in terms of the health of the people.
Yeah. Well, this brings me to the point. I know you do have, just for our viewer to know, you do have a background in healthcare. So, and specifically, you deal with the conditions of Parkinson's. You've spent years and years. And so, as a managing director in the clinic where you have, where do you see, for example, an approach to Parkinson's, the way you approach it, your clinic approach it, versus how the healthcare system in America approach Parkinson's? And this is a common condition. It exists too.
Oh, well, approximately 20 million people worldwide have Parkinson's disease. And you take a look at the mainstream way of dealing with Parkinson's, and the cost of that is $25,000 to $26,000 per year. And if a Parkinson's person lives an additional 20 years, you multiply it by 20. All of a sudden, that's a lot of money. The medical system and the pharmaceutical system have more or less shut other ways of dealing with Parkinson's down as much as possible. They want to own the market. We deal with it for less than $8,000 a year, sometimes only $6,000. Wow. And manage it a whole lot better, remarkably better. But it really tells you that with all the licenses and with all the FDA and all the other things, the hoops that a person has to jump through to get something into treatment for people is extraordinarily expensive, and they're trying to cut down all the competition that they possibly can, which jacks the prices up.
Yeah. Well, that's why we said earlier, if we are to say what's wrong with the American health care system, there is nothing wrong with it if you are thinking in terms of profit.
Right.
That exemplify.
And who are the influencers with the Congress and so on? It's the lobbyists representing
pharmaceuticals
and big medicine and insurance companies. And we take a look at this hodgepodge system that's really put together here, and it borders on chaos.
Yeah.
And it borders on way overly expensive in terms of what people are getting.
Well, interesting enough that I read somewhere recently, I was just like a week ago or so, about in some medical journal that in Canada, an insulin will cost about, I think, $30 or $60
a month.
The same thing here in the U.S. costs about $500. And you wonder, that's what's wrong with the American system, is the cost. And as we said at the beginning, this will have a major impact on everybody's financial well-being.
Absolutely.
Because there are those who've said that if you get sick in America, you'll go bankrupt.
Recently saw an interview with someone who got a surprise bill from their hospital. $3 million.
Wow. How are they going to pay that?
They can't pay it. And I understand that the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States right now is medical bills.
That's correct.
I mean, this is beyond outrageous.
Yeah.
And we take a look at so many other places where they're doing it better. It's not like there aren't models in the world of people getting it right or getting it at least significantly better. People are involved, so we're going to see a lot of whatever.
Yeah.
But a whole lot better at a lot less cost.
So Germany is an example.
And there are many other examples in the world of people doing it so well.
But also, if we look at this from the perspective of budgeting, what we notice is that the healthcare system receives about $83 billion
From the government?
from the government. Guess how much defense receives from the government? About $500 billion. So you can just see where the priorities are. And when you have a population that is sick, given what they consume, the air they breathe, and so forth, and people are not taking care of themselves also to be responsible for their own health.
You know, interestingly, one of the things about the German healthcare system is you have an incentive to take care of yourself. You have an incentive to not smoke. You have an incentive to lose weight. You have an incentive to stay well. It's a monetary incentive. And what do you know? It works.
Yeah, it's because people are playing a role into their own health in sense of they gotta maintain the. I mean, the idea of the expensive healthcare system, yes, because of the profits, because the insurance and so forth. We are not denying that some insurances are very good. When I used to work in Washington, I remember I used to have a great insurance back then. But even with all that, I hardly ever see a doctor. I did not need to.
Right.
But also because I am taking a responsibility for my own health. So I watch what I eat. I sort of take care of myself. That prevents me from seeing a doctor for whatever reason.
In any doctor's office right now, what used to be 5% going to the overhead, meaning paperwork, now it's 40%. That means 40% of every dollar that comes into that practice now goes to paying for the paperwork and bureaucracy dealing with the government and insurance companies.
Well, that explains the jacked up price in the 19% of GDP between now and 2027. So what does it mean to you? That means the healthcare cost is going to keep going up, impacting your financial well-being. And this is something all of us, we need to be aware of and understand the ramification if it's not addressed immediately.
The question is, how do we as Americans influence our legislative bodies to do something that makes sense? We can't call somebody who's advocating for universal health care without real analysis of being a socialist. What I'm suggesting is a deep dive into what the systems of the world caring for people really are and the models they represent are a good way to get informed so you can have a well-developed opinion on what's going on.
Yeah. That's correct, because if we look at the system in Germany, we don't call it socialism, it's just the healthcare system in Germany is well organized and the government has that authority to set a set price for procedures. We don't have that aspect here because of lobbyists.
Right.
Behind closed doors, as I always call them, the hidden hand in Washington, D.C. Basically, they are controlling the market, per se. And legislators, because we got weak members of Congress with no courage whatsoever, they prefer that I rather get the support, the financial support from a lobbyist for my next re-election than worrying about what an average citizen have to deal with when it comes down to healthcare.
You know, in the bottom analysis here, what it really comes to is get informed. The second thing is that you can't ask the government or the pharmaceutical companies or the medical industry to take care of you. That responsibility really falls to you to get the information and to take good care of yourself.
And as always, stay informed. Till next time.